Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I am your host, Michael Mamas, and here today with Adrian Dewey. And we're coming to you from Mount Soma in the mountains of western North Carolina, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple. Today, we're going to talk about critical theory. And it's kind of interesting how the whole thing, in fact, before we did the podcast, Adrian, you were asking me about, what were you saying? Where did I get the idea to talk about that?
Yeah, clearly there's stuff in the news that seems related, but people may not actually know that, critical theory is related to what's going on, or at least the base of it. But I was wondering why you decided that was a good topic for today.
Yeah, let me see if I can even recollect. Of course, what's really in the news a lot now, as you referenced, really was critical race theory. And how they're teaching that to kids in the schools, and there's a lot of debate about whether or not that should be done, and blah blah. But somewhere, and I can't remember where, somebody said something about that. Really, it was originally the original idea was critical theory, and then only quite recently they interjected the word race, critical race theory. And so that kind of intrigued me. So actually, and you may want to do this, is I went online and actually Wikipedia had a pretty good thing on critical theory. But I'll tell you, if you Google critical theory, just critical race theory comes up, boom, 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 and you hardly even see critical theory, which is really the foundation of it. But the idea of critical theory, and I'm no expert on it, I just read a little bit in Wikipedia and a couple other sites, but the idea of critical theory goes back, way back decades, if not hundreds of years. And the idea was to try to analyze what the influences are that formulate the thinking of a society, of a culture. What are the different components that go into that? Not just economic or political, but social. And then what happened? Let's see. As I recall, the next thing in that article talked about Marx and how Marx kind of. Oh yeah. My understanding was that Marx kind of took on the idea of critical theory and started to use it, the concept, not just as an understanding of a society and a culture, but as a means to, what's the word, Adrian, manipulate or influence a culture. So how to get people thinking a certain way. And then that whole idea, and it's kind of interesting because I talked about, remember in the previous podcast, Adrian, I was talking about the marijuana and drug era of the 60s, 70s, and how it was really influenced a lot of the people in the universities who became our professors and our attorneys and like that.
Yeah.
And so those people were really strongly influenced by a drug culture. So in a sense, you could use the phrase, if you wanted, critical drug theory, because that was a major component. And then, of course, as racism came up, the notion of critical race theory. And here's one component. See, naming something has some power, and especially if the name is a buzzword, like drugs. I mean, that triggers people. Critical drug theory. All of a sudden, it gives them something they can hang on to. Or critical race theory. Oh, okay, now we're into this whole arena of racism, which is up in the news, And so if you think about it, and I'd like you to think about it, you can come up with other things on your own that were major influences in the forming of the mentality we're with today. critical computer theory. Or maybe rephrase that, critical, what do they call it? Uh, Big tech, and how they have critical Facebook theory, and how it's gone such a long way in influencing and formulating the mindset of people today.
All
We've
the
also
social
talked
media.
about, what's that?
All the social media.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, all the social media. And look at television, and even how television has changed in the past decades, so and how television, what is okay on TV now that perhaps wasn't okay a while ago, and what's popular on TV, and how it has very powerfully influenced the mindset of humanity. We could even talk about critical Jyotish theory. We've talked about how the astrological influence are such that this, and then that goes into the whole thing about the phase transition predicted by Jyotish and Veda and all that. But I'll tell you, I found something. I heard something on the news that I thought was really interesting. The airlines, Adrian, for how many decades, a long time, have been serving alcohol on the flights. Well,
yeah, since their inception.
Yeah, that's right. Well, recently, I understand that Southwest Airlines and American Airlines, I don't know if there are others, have discontinued providing alcohol in coach class because people are becoming belligerent. And I think it's interesting that with the phase transition now and the tonal quality of the culture now, and all the polarization that's gotten created through critical political theory, critical social media theory, all these different things. It just fits right along with critical Jyotish theory and all these different factors that are coming into play that have created an attitude where now people, have a couple of drinks on an airplane and they started jacking the hostess, Just so something's going on,
Yeah.
And it's all tied together, and it all has to do with critical theory. I think critical theory explains quite a bit. And the ancient rishis, particularly, I would talk about actually Maharishi Patanjali, and he talked about the samskaras. The samskaras are impressions on the awareness, impressions on the consciousness, and there's a storehouse of impressions called the chit, and what those different impressions are and how deeply they influence the storehouse of impressions, the mind, determines how people think, how people function. And now we have all these really powerful influences with social media and television and the drugs and just different political charges and racism and all these different things are really leaving very deep, some scars, very deep impressions on people. And then it becomes sort of a self-justifying. Well, the other one is defunding the police, right? Those kind of things before computers and television were out so much. I mean, they wouldn't catch fire as easily, But now it's just become very popular. I also had the thought about people get to the point, especially because there's so many powerful influences now, that I think people get overwhelmed and they feel like they're not heard. And they get frustrated and they get angry. And they try to find a way where they can get people to listen to them. And I think on some degree, we all experience that. I mean, how many times do you say something and people don't listen to you? Or, I mean, wouldn't it be a different world if everybody agreed with everything you said, and everything you thought? But that's not the way it is, But some people get so frustrated, I think, about it and so agitated about it that they feel a need to act out. And I think in a way, and I mean, this might be overly simplistic. In fact, I believe it is a rather simplistic, but I think that's a component, let's put it that way, to the whole Antifa thing. People are frustrated. They don't like the way things are. They want them to change. And so the only way they know to affect change is through violence. I also think, these horrible things where people go in. What was it, Adrian, just recently in South Florida? Somebody went in.
You're talking about the mass shootings?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one guy recently, I think, shot 47 people or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's happening more and more.
Crazy.
Yeah, the world's gone crazy. And I think if we take a look at critical theory and all the different influences that are there, I think it can start to give us an insight, especially if you amalgamate all these different critical theories: critical justice theory, critical drug theory, critical race theory, critical politics theory, critical social media theory. I mean, it's enough already, But now, what do we do about it? Because think about it. What are we doing in this podcast? If we're not careful, we're laying another rap on you. And I mean, we've had so many raps laid on us, and here's one more. And I think it's just become too much. So I think the key is, how do we deal with it? I know a lot of people say, well, I just don't listen to the news. Well, that's uninformed. That's a little bit like burying your head in the sand, So I think we can overdo it and to get too caught up in the news and too caught up in this stuff. But we need to be informed. We need to, I think, have a knowledge of what's going on. Otherwise, the whole momentum of society is carrying us in a direction that we don't know anything about, and we just someday will find ourselves there, and that's dangerous.
And it seems really particularly strong now. It seems like the world is changing from day to day. And if you're not keeping your finger on the pulse of, all the news options, you have no idea what's going on. And the changes are coming so quickly.
It's an excellent point because depending on what your source of news is, you can get vastly different perspectives of what's going on. And how do you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you got the extreme right, you got the extreme left, you got this, you got that. And how do you know who's right and who's not? And they're all vying for your mind.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that's what this is really ultimately about, right?
Yeah.
There's this stream going through society, and certain aspects of society or certain ideologies take hold with the hope of shaping your mind and shaping your thoughts towards certain ideologies or in certain political directions or whatever it is.
And to different degrees, it's been going on, or in different ways, it's been going on throughout history. I've talked about the Bolshevik Revolution, and how that was actually historically, now we understand, it wasn't about the Tsar so much as it was about bankers who wanted to take over the economy of Russia. And so they created this whole thing. And I guess they were bankers in the United States, England, and Germany, I think. But the point being that they got a hold of the mass media. They had an understanding of critical theory and how to infiltrate it and how to create an influence. And look what happened. And that's how really the Soviet Union got created,
Yeah. And now, how many sources of social media do we have at our fingertips?
And they're all pushing you. They're all trying to get you to think. And a lot of it is so subliminal. Like I was saying, the television programs. And they all seem, not all, but a number of them have like a underlying political agenda, commercials even.
Yeah, for sure.
They're all kind of pushing you in different directions, you know?
And it seems much more extreme and notable than it used to be,
I've heard a lot of people say that, Adrian.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like they get fed up with the commercials because it's just that there's an agenda and they just keep pushing it and pushing it. And
yeah, those influences are everywhere. They're coming from every direction. Like you said, there's so many, and they're all vying for first place in your kind of psyche or your life. I think, when we get those streams of ideology going and we adopt them as our own, it shapes our lives. It shapes our expectations of society, and it shapes
it's an
our
interesting.
culture.
Yeah, that's right. It's an interesting thing, Adrian. There was like a guy. I believe he was a Russian, and I believe he was in the KGB. But at any rate, he was talking. He was a part of the whole thing where they were planning the infiltration and takeover of America, and they had certain fundamental principles. And one of the fundamental principles that stand out in my mind is they say it takes a whole generation because you have to capture the minds of the youth and then condition, manipulate, get them all thinking a certain way based on your agenda. And that is, in fact, what Russia was consciously, actively doing. Soviet Union, that is, was consciously, actively doing.
And it really was about shaping the minds of the next generation.
Shaping the minds of a whole generation. Because if you can capture one generation, then that generation can perpetuate and take over the other generations. So the thing is, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? Well, it really goes deeply into not just an understanding of critical theory, but also an understanding of how we function as human beings. They talk about elephants and how incredibly social elephants are. I don't know if you know that, but one elephant can't really live alone because it needs other elephants. What's that?
I love elephants.
Yeah.
I have a thing for elephants. Yeah.
Yeah. But human beings are the same way. I mean, critical peer theory would be another one because our peers, it goes so far. And I even remember my kids, they were thinking a certain way, and I don't think it came from us. I mean, I didn't really. But I just noticed.
Peers become so important for kids.
Yeah.
More important than adults, more important than their parents.
Like a rather benign example is my older daughter was really into, when she was a little girl, she loved country, Western country music, and she'd be playing it all the time, and she knew all the songs. And I remember if I'd be driving them somewhere, they'd want me to put on this country station, and she'd be singing along with the songs. She's just this little kid. But I remember when she went to school, it seemed pretty evident to me, though she never said it, but it seemed pretty evident to me that her friends thought that country music was corny, at any rate. Old-fashioned. For some reason, it just, like on a dime, she stopped listening to it and she started listening to, I don't know if it's called rock and roll these days or what, but more popular music that was popular with other kids. And you also see that politically. So much. What school kids go to, what the political attitudes of the professors and of the parents of the other children, because that influences the kids, and it becomes this group consciousness, this mindset, and it overtakes people, and that's how they start thinking.
Yeah, even for adults, they say the 5 people that you hang around shape you. They help shape your personality, your goals, your ideologies. And so, that thing, pick your friends carefully. And it
Yeah.
doesn't just apply to children, it's for adults too. It's really amazing
And
what
trying to talk
influence.
somebody down from their indoctrination, trying to say, hey, look, this is what's happened. And you meet tremendous resistance, because what happens is, you get put in a box based on their current identity. Well, what was it? There's a really interesting component to that.
Well,
Reality.
having something imposed
No, yeah,
versus
here it
freeing
is.
yourself from yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Perception of reality is far more powerful, far more prevalent, and far more dominant than reality. That so fits so deeply into what the ancient seers said. They talked about samskaras and impressions and how you get the impressions stored and everything. But they also said we don't perceive. We project onto, we perceive onto. Based on our current samskaras, our current conditioning, the peer influence, the 5 most important people, Adrian, like you were saying, and how they form your thinking. And see, this gets delicate too, because in one sense, it's a good thing in the sense that a healthy culture helps culture the minds of the people. A healthy family helps culture the mentality of the family members. All that is good. But when does a culture cease to really be healthy, or a group, a subgroup, a clique, whatever, the people you hang out with, whatever? How do you know if it's unhealthy or healthy? Because from your world, you're convinced that that's correct. And so how do you sidestep this whole thing of, everybody's vying for your mind, and they're all trying to win your mind, and how do you prevent that from happening? Well, first thing is this: where does your own inner wisdom come from? And I'm telling you, it doesn't come from the surface. Adi Shankara, the first Shankaracharya, great saint. What was I going to say that he said? It was so good. Adrian, I lost it. What was I going to say about Adi Shankara? And he was talking about people. Go ahead. People plan for your mind.
Yeah. I wasn't really sure where you were going with it.
Yeah.
We'd been talking about we perceive onto reality. We don't really see reality. And it's based on the wisdom doesn't come from the surface.
Oh, yeah. So the idea is that you have to discernment was the thing that he was talking about. You have to cultivate discernment. Adi Shankara, he called the spiritual path the path of discernment. And discernment, you see, isn't just thoughts, and it isn't just latching on to a superficial model and having it make some sense on some superficial level. And so you go with it, and then it overwhelms your feelings and your thoughts, and you decide you found truth. The art of discernment is looking deeper. And it's not just your feelings, but it's your deep feelings, the feelings that lie deeper than what's been formulated by critical theory, conditioning, programming, and then your emotions get invested in that. He talks about discernment is accessing that place that lies deeper inside your place of wisdom that transcends critical theory, that transcends bias, that is innate, it's inherent, it's what did they say in the Constitution? They actually have a nice phrase. It's inalienable. It's inherent in our nature. It's natural law. And with all these influences, this is such an important point. With all these influences and everything, Adrian, that are going on, people lose touch with that. And they think their passion is their deeper truth. Whereas really their passion is the samskaras and the impositions and whoever has captured their mind and their thinking. And whatever your generation got overtaken by, kind of like that KGB guy was talking about, and conditioned and programmed you to think and feel a certain way. The most important part of this is not just meditation. Meditation is key to accessing that place. But I'm telling you, I've seen so many people who've been meditating for decades, and that's great, but they're indoctrinated into a mentality, and that's the way they think. And it's more of an indoctrination than coming from a place of inner wisdom. So discernment isn't something you cultivate after meditating even a lifetime. It helps, of course. But I think we also do well to take a step back and ask ourselves, what do we believe and why do we believe it? What are the influences? What critical theory, be it critical race theory, critical TV theory, critical peer group theory, on and on. What is it that actually we've kind of latched our mind and our heart onto and decided that that's who we are and what we believe?
And how do we make some, flexibility around that?
Well, it's a good point. It's a good point because you see, I think if we take a look at it, when I work with people, a lot of times they'll get to the point where they'll see what they're doing, for example, be it with that or whatever issue. And then they always seem to say, well, what do I do about it? Now that I see it, what do I do about it? I always say the same thing. This is the doing. The light of awareness heals. Once you start to realize that, oh my God, I'm thinking this way because I've been indoctrinated into thinking that way, it can enable you, to use a very simplistic example that may be right, may not, but it might enable you to say, you know what, I really do like country music.
Yeah. That's the question, right? What do we really believe with all of this stuff coming in from every direction?
Yeah.
What do I really believe?
And how can I access that? It's not easy to do.
Right.
What Bruce Lee, that quote, I like that Bruce Lee quote in that black and white video that's famous that he did some interview. And he said, he even said martial arts, but it's really everything, is about genuinely expressing yourself. And he said, and that's not so easy to do. It's not easy to do. It's very hard to do, I think he said. And really, it all boils down to that, doesn't it, Adrian?
Well, that's what evolution really is.
There you go.
Becoming yourself without all the overlays, without self-deception, without those external influences. Just who are you really at the core?
Somebody, this was years ago, but they put up their hand in one of my classes and they said, why do you say one thing one day and then the next day you say something different that contradicts it? And I just said, right.
Yeah.
Right. Because another thing the ancient rishis said is knowledge exists in the gap between identities, between realities, if you will, between perceived realities. And so if we give expression to one and then give an expression to other, the only true knowing is what? Knowing that you know no thing. And we're so inundated with things and we're trying to find that thing. It's not about that. So I'd like to think that my teachings, what we're talking about here today, even though it could be viewed as, oh, he's pushing another agenda, here's still another worldview. I'd like to think that if we work with it in the way we were working with this, it's something that will free you from getting your mind overtaken. We use perspectives, but they must not use us. You see?
I love that knowledge is in the gap.
It's in the gap.
It's
Knowledge is in the gap.
That's right. And wisdom bubbles up from that
that's right.
place in the gap.
Exactly right. The and that expression was so nice. What Socrates, or the only true knowing is knowing that you know nothing. It's in the gap,
Yeah.
All right. I think
you used to talk about, when the whole world is enlightened, we're still going to have Republicans and we're still going to have Democrats and we're still going to have Christians and we're still going to have atheists.
That kind of fits, Adrian, doesn't it? The podcast we did last week where we talked about boxes and even in Vastu, even the very fundamental building blocks of existence. There's the difference between a loaf of bread and a set containing a loaf of bread. A loaf of bread put in a box. There's a difference between pure consciousness and consciousness aware of itself. All of a sudden, it's put in a box. It's all about boxes. So if you're functioning in the world, you're functioning in the arena of boxes. That's Vastu science, fence. It's called, the word for Vastu is fence. Mm-hmm. And that's the nature of existence. And so, there's this worldview, there's that worldview, there's this box, there's that box. But knowledge is contained in the gap between them. And that's why they talk about Maya, illusion. Consciousness viewed itself as other. And that's a mistake. There is no other. It's just consciousness. And they call that illusion. So this is the world of illusion. Now, some people hear that and they get depressed. Oh, no, this is a big illusion. How horrible. How can you say that? Well, no, we have our connotations with the word illusion, but it's not like that. Because look at the grandeur that it creates. Otherwise, you got pure, flat, absolute. So there's a value to the boxes as long as a relationship with it, and that's a phrase I use a lot, relationship with everything is critical, including what we're talking about today. It's not about the thing. It's not about the box. It's about your relationship with the thing. And that's something that's cultivated, and as that discernment gets cultivated more and more and more and more refined, what happens is that's called spiritual liberation. You're functioning through the boxes, but you're not lost to them. All right, Adrian, I think that's it. Anything else before we
No, that was a beautiful summary.
It was a beautiful topic,
Yeah.
All right, everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.